everyone was a part of a coaching cycle, whether you had, phenomenal scores or whether, there was great room for improvement.
So it's not about going in and saying the teacher's doing this, this, and this. It's about, here are my students. Everybody wants their students to do well.
And it also allowed us to come together and collaborate and see what worked, see what didn't work. It allowed me to have an extra set of eyes on my lesson plans and give me tips and ideas and different ways to improve what I was already teaching in the classroom.
Here they came in a big nosy truck.
Several schools have exited the Focus School initiative and continued to post gains, showing that sustainability is possible.
And so our teachers have a confidence now that they have not had before. They are able to see what the extra push in planning, the extra push in collaboration is able to achieve.
The Focus Schools initiative is intense and time-consuming, but in the midst of a teacher and administrator shortage where there's no guarantee of high-quality candidates, building the capacity of existing employees is positive and proactive.
It looks like it has more weight than the popcorn.
I think that starts with the students. They start to see growth, they want more. The teachers are seeing that growth and praising them, which in turn, they want more strategies and more support. The instructional coach, everybody's like, this is working, what else can we do? And it does, it kind of spirals into, here we are, like we're doing it.
The Focus Schools process requires a commitment by both the school and district leadership and is all about high-quality support, not accountability and compliance. In this model, the district works alongside school personnel to improve outcomes.
And I think that we've all grown stronger as educators. I know that I am certainly not the same principal that I was 2 years ago. I'm not the same principal that I was 1 year ago. This process has helped me grow as a leader. It's helped my teachers grow. And the most important thing is it's helped our kids grow. And we are so excited about the growth that we've seen. Well, we had the highest growth in the district when you combine our math and our ELA growth. And that is just phenomenal. We knew our students could do it. I knew the teachers could do it. And we just seeing the results, the proof's in the pudding, so to speak. So the pudding is tasting really good this year.
While difficult conversations must occur to ensure that all decisions are student-centered, it is done with a spirit of support and a focus on students.
So as both the video mentioned and Ms. Lewis mentioned, the Focus Schools process is not a punitive process. It's meant for us, the whole way we designed that was so we were coming alongside the school and the principal to help support instruction in their role. And I would say that all of our principals would feel that way. Even the new principals in the district that just got here from other districts. Ms. Simmons mentioned to me the other day from Thomas E. Kearns. She didn't really know what to think about this, all these district people in her schools. And that was a little scary because in her previous district, that was a bad thing that they were in there. It was compliance and it was accountability. And now, she's talking about, she said that our coaches that we have in our school are like part of her staff. They are part of her instructional coaching staff, even though they technically sit up here. And so she was talking about the change that has had to happen in her mindset, that it's here as a support and a help, not as a punitive measure. Certainly, as the video also said, we have to have sometimes hard conversations with principals. Sometimes there's things happening. They're a focus school for a reason. Our whole job is to go in and look at what's not working. Maybe some things aren't working from a leadership level. And so the assistant superintendents do have to have sometimes difficult conversations with principals about areas that may not be performing as well and how we need to change and alter that to make sure they are performing at a higher level. So, I think, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, we have, I believe, 45 minutes for questions. So I'm going to start with Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell.
Thank you, Jeff, for that presentation. I have just a couple of questions. On the slide that has the names of the schools on it.
For the progress?
The subgroup legend.
You're talking about the state designation.
Yeah. What I noticed was that the majority of the well, all of the high schools on the ATSI,
Yes, ma'am.
the identified subgroup that wasn't performing is the the students with disabilities.
Yes, ma'am.
Is special education part of your academic specialists that go into those schools, and why do you think that is? That is mainly the students with disabilities in the high schools.
So I think one of the things, I think I've mentioned this before, and you certainly know this too. Elementary does a really good job differentiating instruction. As you go up, that gets a little bit more difficult sometimes in there. And so what I would say, we've worked with Ms. Hogan, I don't know if she's here, whether she is. Ms. Hogan she's part of my leadership team, obviously, so we are all under one umbrella. And so her specialists, Ms. Hogan doesn't go to every focus school, but her specialists are at most of our focus school meetings. They are working side by side with the schools and the special ed classes. And more importantly, Ms. Hogan's really had an emphasis since she's come into our district. She's really put the emphasis on gen ed teachers. That's where we're going to get the gains out of, to your point, where the high schools are with the students with disabilities. We've got to work more in tandem with our general ed population teachers, because most of our students are inclusion in students with disabilities that would fall into this category.
Okay, is that at the high school level too? I mean,
Yes,
it's across the board.
It's across the board, but you'll
inclusion.
find even more at the high school level, because the whole goal is that they're going to graduate with a diploma. They can't be in, self-contained. And so, so we're working heavily with those gen ed teachers to give them strategies on how do you work with the special ed kids that are in your classroom to make sure they're achieving.
That was the only question that I had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Paul O'Connor?
No, I can see why everybody would like to have this support. It's really awesome the gains you're seeing from it, and whenever we need to do it, I hope that we would expand the resources to make it possible for all the schools asking for it to be able to get that help. I wonder if the Fountain Inn principal told me that I asked her why they had such awesome gains in early reading, and tried to imagine what could account for an 18 or 19% growth. I don't know if I'm getting this vibration on mine. Are you?
I don't know if it's me or you, but
It's really distracting. I'm sorry.
Turn to yours.
Did I turn mine off?
I'm trying to turn his off and see if that helped, because yours was loud.
Anyway, one of the things that she said, and I wanted your thoughts about it, was that she was using FastBridge, not just with elementary kids, but at every grade level. And I wondered, she said that helped them diagnostically to be able to respond quickly to the reading levels and needs and to address it quickly. And another was something called WIN, what I need time, and I can't remember if she said 45 minutes a day or a week, but it's a day, that students would actually get whatever they needed in terms of specific individualized instruction. Are those parts of what you all gave them as suggestions and support, or something that they...
So the win time, we've got some other schools that do similar things, call it different things. The win time that Ms. Reese wanted to do was not part of they were a focused school. I was a little apprehensive about that much time being pulled out of the school day for that, but she is an amazing principal, and she has very structured time for what has to happen during that time. And so that plan that she had, we felt very comfortable with her trying it. And she's gotten some good results from that. We've done some things at other schools similarly, with some mixed results, but we've learned that we have to, that can't be a just show up and a teacher, it's got to be planned. I mean, teachers got to know what they're doing with those kids at that time. So it's another, You gotta sell your faculty on, they gotta be on board because it's another prep, so to speak, because they can't just show up and you do something with them, you gotta know what you're working on with the kids.
Right.
But that was really her idea to bring that from her previous school.
It's very exciting.
Yeah, and she's had great success with it on there. And the Fast Bridge thing, we are looking at that pilot. We haven't have extra licenses. Now, I think she bought a few, and so we had some extra. She bought some to kind of pilot and see how that might look if it went up in the upper grades. So that's something we're monitoring as well, if that's success, to look at, do we need to expand that?
I guess I add that to an earlier question about testing is, are you looking routinely, and I'm imagining the answer is yes, but to make sure that each and every assessment our teachers are giving relates directly to the ability to improve instruction and to, just period, to improve instruction, whether it's from the teaching side or the progress or individual learning side?
Yes, I would say all the assessments do. The only one that I would say is kind of the exception to that would be the math testing in 5th and 8th grade. That gives us Lexile levels, but the Fontes and Pinnell levels are more actionable, if you will, from that. Now, they'll look at those that we give to see, does it match up? And most of the time, our MAP score Lexiles are matching up with our Fontes and Pinnell levels where they are. So it's a good check to kind of see, where they are.
MAP testing adds the benefit of being able to compare ourselves outside South Carolina.
Correct. That's one of the things you can use outside of South Carolina, correct. But yeah, every other test, the FastBridge data is used very heavily. That's how we identify that and a combination of a few other things. We identify every year, we give schools a list of how many kids they've got in intervention. And so our benchmark has always been, if you've got more than 20% of your kids in intervention, then you've got a core instruction problem. And so that would be another identifier. We would work with the assistant superintendents on, this school's sitting at 38% of their kids in intervention. Like, what can we do to go in there and help those schools and those teachers? Because they've already obviously got a core instruction issue. And so that's another way we would use to identify support for those schools.
Okay, and the last question I have relates to the performance with subgroups. And what specific ways do we offer assistance to schools based on what that subgroup might be? So, you addressed a little bit earlier that, okay, we're good at matching teachers who are very capable with special needs students with a class with that need. But what about schools if you know that it's poverty or Hispanic students and coming in increasing numbers and not having anybody in school who can speak Spanish with them to help the families transition and so on? How are you, this team you described is pretty much focused on general instructional improvement practices. What do you do for that targeted work that is only about subgroups?
That's a great question. I'm going to try this slide just to see if I can get it. No. Yeah. So one of the things we're doing, I should have mentioned this. I didn't mention this. It isn't off yet. One of the things I didn't mention is on that same team in our focus schools, ELL is represented. So Tanya Franca's office is sitting at the table, and then special ed, of course, is sitting at the table as well. So we do, because I don't know if you remember, because you were here. You were here before we kind of restructured academics. There was a time where academics was separate from special ed and separate from, all those are under one umbrella now. So that support can be much more intentional when we go into a school. And so both for ELL and special education, the last 2 years we've been heavily focused on gen ed teachers, training gen ed teachers on how do you teach students to have ELL? Because what strategies do you use for ELL kids? Because those strategies used for ELL kids are good for gen ed kids and they're good for SPED kids too. Or SPED kid strategies are good for ELL kids, are good for gen ed students as well. The subgroup populations that are around the students in poverty, we know students in poverty, typically it's a background knowledge issue. They don't have necessarily, a lot of times will come in not at the level they need to come in. And that gap, a lot of times they stay behind. And so for us, we really work with principals for any kid. It doesn't have to just be the subgroup. We don't really focus on subgroup. We're focusing on 20% of the kids at this school are in the 20th percentile or not performing. Now, all the kids, if they're identified for white underperforming, that's going to be, a lot of those kids are going to be in that subgroup. And we really look at then, of those 20%, let's say that's 60 kids. Those 60 kids, are all those kids in intervention? So are all those kids in reading intervention? Are all those kids in math intervention? Are all those kids in, whatever happens to be, to make sure all those kids that are being identified in that subgroup actually have supports around helping them improve in some, whatever capacity that is based on their subgroup population.
Time to their day. If you know that there's a chronic issue with the subgroup and you say, okay, we're not able to hit it during the school year, no matter what we're doing, but we're going to consider additional instructional time for these groups who are chronically.
Yeah, so the biggest example of that would be in our students in the morning. We don't have a lot of luck sometimes after school, because a lot of times for our students, particularly in poverty, our Title I schools, a lot of times their parents can't get them to and from school. Even transportation sometimes, if we provide it, is difficult because it's a child care issue sometimes when they get home and all that. So what we have worked with schools, particularly at the elementary, even the middle school a little bit, elementary level specifically though, they have, a lot of times those kids are being dropped off at 7:15. And so we're really pushing our principals that aren't already to say, identify those kids, to your point, that need more time in the instructional day. You can start that day at 7:15 for those kids. They're already there. They're a captive audience. They can't leave. So they were dropped off and they're there. And so what we would say is that because most of those are Title I schools, they have funds that they actually can pay those teachers if they needed to, even to come in earlier if they needed to. But they can pay teachers before school, after school to run tutorials, so to speak, with kids in there. So we found more success in the morning because it's not a transportation issue for the kids. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. O'Connor. Mr. Lewis.
Thanks. I just have a couple of questions. So maybe since we're already on this slide, we'll start with this one. So I know that we don't know what we don't know about the future, but if you look at these 5 schools and how they're currently trending, do you expect them to move out of these required focus schools in the next iteration, or are we seeing growth across the state that might slow their improvement?
What I can tell you, because Dr. McDavid is the data queen in my department, along with Dr. McCreary, who follow this, all of us monitor it very heavily. This year, Lakeview with the new cut scores was like 0.2 of a point getting out if this would have been a new cycle year. So I'm confident, Dr. McDonald works there much closer, but we're all very comfortable with where Ms. Dobbins is in moving that school instructionally. I have some high hopes that they will get out. If they don't get out, they have made great strides because they were, on the CSI status, they were actually sitting almost near the bottom of the stage. So to be now X amount of tenths of a point away from the cut score is pretty amazing that they've been able to make that kind of a gain. The priority schools, we are sitting at Carolina right now. I don't know, because this is the end of the year. This year is when they will identify those schools again. I don't know that we will have had enough time at Carolina for them to move out of that or not, because as you said, the cut scores are moving across the state now up. Heritage, I'm very confident will come off that list. Heritage has made ridiculous gains in their test scores, as you heard from Heather. She's had some of the highest test growth, so I have no doubt they will be out of the focus school, out of the priority status. Thomas E. Kearns, very hopeful again. Miss Simmons is doing a phenomenal job at, and she is monitoring data weekly at that school. Again, they were pretty solid in that box, and so I know she's made growth towards it. I think it's going to be close for them to be getting out of that again, but I think she has got a good shot of moving out. Woodmont Middle, Jennifer has made, Couch down there, has made great gains and grows, and I believe she'll be out of it by the next identification. Again, holding that those schools in the state don't jump significantly.
Okay. The other question I have is about the chart that has the percentage gains for each of the schools.
I'm sorry, Doug, can you say that one more time?
The chart that has the English language arts and math percentage gains over 3 years. So it appears to me that when you look at, especially the elementary schools, that in English, in general, all of these schools made pretty similar gains of, 8 to 10%. over 3 years. But if you look at math, the gains are kind of all over the place, with some of them making 1 or 2% and some of them making 28%. So what's going on there between those two subjects?
So there's a couple of things I would say. Typically when we go into a school, our focus is typically on language arts because that tends to be the lowest performing. And we also know that reading impacts literally every other subject in the future. So we tend to focus on reading. And what I would say is our staff, when they're in there, unlike middle school, it's a math teacher, English teacher, we can go into middle school and work on every single subject at a time because it's different teachers. Elementary, because they're doing all 4 subjects, it's very difficult for us to focus both on math and ELA for teachers. So I'd have to go back and look and see where we focused on those. I will say, for example, though, a lot of them back in 2018 also, the other thing we had going during the focus school process is where we implemented TE21. And so a lot of the principals last year, when they talked about their tremendous growth, a lot of them attributed that to TE21. And a lot of our principals who maybe didn't see as high a growth last year, they started working with the schools that were seeing higher growth. So they've got a little bit more sold on it the first next year, so to speak, because they saw some tremendous growth. So it's hard to say where. I will say our impact, I could go down almost all of those. I will say Fountain Inn. It was weird when we went into Fountain Inn that with certain grade levels, the deficit was reading and certain grade levels it was math. Deficit areas in Fountain Inn, when we first went in, was just teaching strategies across the board. And so we focused generally at Fountain Inn and all subjects and teaching strategies, and that was kind of low-hanging fruit, which is why you see some of those higher gains. Ms. Reese has her work cut out for her now because she's grabbed the low-hanging fruit. So now to keep that moving, she's going to have to, and we're going to have to continue to support her more specifically. I will say when you look at, for example, Cherrydale is a one. Cherrydale, when Ms. Johnson came in, we did a reboot of balanced literacy. And so we kind of start over a little bit with balanced literacy there. She had a lot of turnover in teachers, and so there's just a lot of turnover after that first year. So we kind of start over. So that's why I would say we didn't get the gains at Cherrydale in reading versus math. Our folks, because they were Title I, had already been working in those schools in math. So almost every one of those I could go down through and tell you why I think they got the gains. We know all of them had some significant gains because they had data now to inform instruction that they didn't have before.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Shamlin.
Yeah, thanks. Hopefully just a couple of quick questions here. One, I'll do what you're doing here. I guess the first one is the Title I schools automatically fall into the CSI category, right?
No, they have to be in the bottom 5% of the state to fall into CSI.
Oh, what was I hearing then? Maybe I misheard something about Title I schools.
Yeah, so all Title I schools automatically get additional support because of the Title I funds they have.
Okay, so the question was, that probably obviates the question. That's how did they get out of CSI, because they really aren't there to begin with. Yeah. They could be in any level, I take it, just like any of the other schools, and still need the help there. Talking about the lessons and teachers preparing lessons, this maybe is more towards the previous presentation, but I think I may have asked this once or twice before, I cannot remember. Would there be any benefit to having a statewide standardized lesson plan for every class, for every category, and then let the teachers build around that as opposed to having to create their own every day? Would that be of any value to teachers?
So, what I would say, everybody has a different philosophy about that. I certainly have my opinion. In that most teachers don't want a turn-by-turn scripted lesson plan because they would say it takes the creativity out of their teaching. There are certainly teachers that want that, and we do provide some of those resources within our curriculum. But as I said before, not every teacher even uses what we put in the units, and that's okay. There are some teachers that are phenomenally innovative, and they want to do their own thing, and they get great results, and I applaud that. I based my philosophy on my own teaching experience is that I could rarely take a lesson plan myself and teach it because I needed to put my own flavor and flair on it. Most teachers would be that way and don't feel like they have the ownership if you would do whether you do that district-wide, and there are certainly districts in the state that do that. There are some districts that have you turn this page and you're on this and you do this. I do feel like you fall into a little danger, though, of not meeting the needs of every kid when you do that.
Okay.
I think one of the things that happens there, Mr. Shamley, is to kind of further Jeff's point, then you end up having this sort of medium level of instruction that then becomes the maximum. So everybody's everybody's approach in direct opposition to what we just talked about in what good or excellent teaching looks like. It's really the antithesis of that. The only time that I think you would want to use very scripted or directed teaching would be if you were working with a teacher who was really struggling. They're performing at a very low level, and we're trying to build within them a better capacity to become an acceptable teacher. And in that case, you may use some very scripted or direct lesson plans until they get the hang of how you need to do this on your own. There is some value in that kind of thing, and to Mr. McCoy's point, a number of districts have used that. It tends to be greater value if you have a huge academic deficiency with a student and you have some sort of deficiency within the teacher's skill set. It is not what will attain the best results for all students, nor the best result for individual students.
But at the same time, they do have, I guess, like you said, the standards that they've got to cover, which is, I guess, a guideline or a tool for creating a lesson plan.
Yes, sir, and I would say to Dr. Royce's point, I will say over the last couple of years, just given where we are with the teacher shortage, we have been giving more specific direction in our unit plans for teachers because we've got a lot more GATE teachers, PACE teachers who have never been in the classroom before. And so we are providing, we're not scripting lesson plans for them, but because remember from the last presentation, the one thing they should be part of in their school is a professional learning community. And so that professional learning community should be supporting that teacher who's novice or new or struggling to help them build that. But we do provide a little bit more specific direction in our unit plans now than we did 5 years ago.
Okay. And I guess just maybe two quick questions. One, how much do we get on average, or just roughly from the state, for those schools that are in the focus category?
So Dr. McDavid would be the best to answer that on the money for each of those categories, Dr. McDavid. Ballpark.
Ballpark for comprehensive support improvement, or CSI. Each Lakeview received $280,000, $140,000 from the state, $140,000 from the federal level. The priority schools received roughly $140,000 each, and they received those late in the year. They received those late in the year, so they received the 2018-19 allocation at the very end of 2019 in the spring, so they began spending that money this summer, and they're just getting their new allocation for the current year that came in November. So they receive $140,000 each year, and they will have an extra year to spend it. Priority was 140, yes. So everybody gets 140, and CSI gets double 140. And it's contingent upon their school size, but how they set it up, each of the schools receive the same amount.
Okay, thank you. So I guess my follow-up to that one is, wouldn't it be in our interest to have all of our schools on the CSI category?
No, because...
It was a little facetious, but it was...
Well, I say that only because the money comes with a lot of strings. And so the strings that it comes with, number one, is Advanced Ed comes in and evaluates whether or not the principal is capable of leading the school. And you can imagine that's a little stressful for principals. And it's also hard, that would be very difficult recruiting principals and teachers to schools that are in that designation because it's the worst designation to state. It also has, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but it also has a state transformation coach that comes in. I'm always, there's a lot of districts that would probably be helpful for. We have tremendous support in Greenville County and our coaches, and you all have put a lot of money into our support, so it's more as advantageous sometimes for outside coaches coming in. We have a good one at Lakeview, and he's become part of our team, and so he's done a great job. That's not always the case in there because we don't get to choose those people. So there's just a lot of strings that come attached with that, and of course it's a state list too that people can see.
And I guess really what in all seriousness, what leading up to is not, I've asked this question myself, maybe others once or twice too, is would it be of value for all new incoming teachers to have maybe not this type of support, but something like this for new, and do we have something like that we use to really try to dig down with new teachers to make sure that they're getting on board early in the whole process?
Yeah, so we did you may recall, we talked about a teacher success coach pilot that we did this current school year. We did it with about 10 or 12 schools. And with that pilot involved, every first-year teacher got a coach for 2 hours a week. So a teacher success coach. So every new teacher would get every week a 2-hour coach per teacher per week. So if you had 3 new teachers, you'd get 6 hours worth of coaching in that school. That pilot was very successful. The principals were extremely complimentary of the system, so our intention would be going forward that we would be able to expand that out to other schools as well. But we know, as the principals talked about, the principal said that's a great recruiting tool because teachers coming out of college always ask, what support do you have for new teachers? So that's a big tool to your point, yes.
Okay. Thanks, that's all I had.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shamley. Mr. Meek?
Thank you, I believe. Do we have minimum lesson plans that teachers are required to have?
We do not have a district template, if you will. However, with the instructional protocol that we released, we did, where'd it go? We put on the back that whole, it's on the other presentation. The presentation previously had the unit plan template up there. So we have elements that we would say need to be in a quality lesson plan. The caveat to that would be in a focus school. If we go into a focus school and we don't see certain elements in a lesson plan that we need to help coach teachers or teachers need to be more intentional about, then that's something the assistant superintendents would have a conversation with the principal about. We've got to change the structure a little bit because your teachers aren't planning at the level they need to be planning in. But overall, we do not, every school, now I will say almost I think every school has a standard template they use. Some of that teachers came up with principals. So they have, all of them have some sort of template they use, but we do not have one that we require district-wide.
So the teachers have to have a new lesson plan each year? Or do they use the same lesson plan?
They can use the base, I would say, from year to year if they needed to, but I would caution, again, any teacher on that because you have different kids from year to year. So your kids' ability levels and your kids' knowledge changes every year. So yes, you can use the same concepts. We have the same units every year. Most teachers would say they're tweaking those lesson plans each year because they do have different kids. But I mean, the units are going to stay the same. Those units don't change. The lessons might change based on tweaks the teachers are going to make.
Okay. The finance part of the $280,000 at Lakeview is receiving. How much are we expending out of the district office and so on for that extra support that I'm assuming we're giving?
So the extra support that we spend, we don't really spend extra support there. We have coaches that we're already serving Lakeview, Tanglewood, and Berea. So from personnel level, we did not increase our personnel level when Lakeview came in on the CSI status. We were already serving them. The only thing we did was bring them on as a focus school. As even prior to the status being named, but we brought them on as focus school. So the $280,000 really is being spent. Now they can add some other personnel, some other supports by if they needed Read 180 or something like that to support the kids. Those are the kinds of things they would take out of that money because it's not the problem with that money. Of course, is that hopefully you don't have that money every year because hopefully you're coming out of CSI status.
Okay. If it's a 3-year process, I think you said it's a 3-year process with CSI, and they receive the $280,000 at the end of the first year, second year, and third year. So if they come out, they still have that extra money at the end of the third year.
Right.
To use on whatever.
Yeah, typically this year, remember this cycle is only 2 years for that cycle. So yeah, they would technically have, as Charlotte said, they're having that next year to spend it. But this cycle was unique in that only because the accountability model came in late. It's only a 2-year cycle this year. This fall, when they identify the schools for the new categories, it will be a 3-year cycle.
So typically, what did Lakeview use the $280,000 for?
I'm sorry.
What did they use the $280,000 for?
Dr. McDavid or Dr. McDonald would. Yes, McDonald would have to. I don't have each one of those memorized.
Okay.
Lakeview Middle School used a school improvement council model to look at all of the needs and gain input from teachers, parents, and other stakeholders. One of the priorities was literacy, so they added System 44 for a group of students who were reading below the Read 180 level. That was purchased and implemented in an exploratory class. They also added ESOL personnel. We recognize that we will need to change that should the need occur, but they need it based on their planning with Dr. McDonald, one additional ESOL teacher in order to be able to implement fully a model that supported the number of English language learners they had in continual literacy and attainment. So that was a part of it. Additionally, they supported extra activities for the students. They began with after school, but moved the funding to support teachers providing remediation in the morning and still having some in the after school program. There was additional funds for the teachers when Dr. McDonald worked with Mrs. Dobbins in transitioning. The teachers had 4 additional days of planning before the beginning of the school year. The funds were used to bring in a consultant that is nationally renowned, Jack Bruckmeyer, and he talked about the importance of teaming and how they should focus their teaming efforts and working together for students, how they structured their day and their time to be successful. He came in that summer, spent some time with the teachers. They had additional time to work and plan with ESOL teachers and special education teachers. Additionally, he came back in the fall to work with them in a follow-up. They added materials for math, science, social studies as well, and other supports for teachers, including quarterly planning sessions. The teachers received quarterly planning sessions with a substitute. They rotated those around the school so that they could plan their lessons along with the coaches and look at how they structured those. We implemented Carnegie Learning as a pilot in all of the middle schools and hosted days from the district Title IV money for them. Lakeview this year added additional days for the Carnegie coaches, 14 additional days for those coaches to be in their schools working with their teachers around the implementation of math based on the fact that they had some new teachers coming in. And that's just a snippet of the activities they have in their CSI model, but all of them are directed toward teacher and student improvement.
One thing, Mr. Meek, I will say too, is I think as I mentioned before, that planning, Dr. McDonald was heavily involved in that. Dr. McDavid was heavily involved in that. Did I get that mixed? No. Dr. McDavid is the lead for academics at that focus school, and Dr. McDonald is the supervisor. So that whole process is not done in isolation of just the school saying, here's what we want. We are heavily involved in that to make sure those strategies are going to get us some yield results.
Okay, if Lakeview comes out of the CSI status, will they be able to maintain what they have gained without the $280,000, or are they going to need additional revenue to go into that school?
So I think what we would have to do at the end of that cycle is look to see what they had, if that was necessary to continue the growth that they had during that cycle. I would say, and Dr. McDonald certainly again is there much more than I am, I would say the things that have changed as far as where they're getting their growth is because of the focus on the instructional strategies that Ms. Dobbins has been doing with the teachers in the classroom, I believe is what's helping to get that growth. Certainly, intervention and remediation helps too, but the district already provides, Read 180 for the schools. We may have to look at that later and say, they really do need 25 System 44 licenses over there to catch those kids that are really far behind. So that would be analysis that Dr. McDavid and Dr. McDonald will have to look at, when we get to that point to say, here's what we recommend to continue forward. And then we have Title I funds to help support that going forward if we need to.
Okay.
I think that would generally agree too. True, Mr. Meek, on assumption in every one of these schools, when they transition out, those things that aren't tied directly to changes in practices, and I think that was Jeff's first point, those things should be able to be sustained without additional support when you've changed your practices and approaches. But one thing that I think was an example in that list that Dr. McDavid mentioned that occurred to me, additional ESOL personnel, for example. And that's not a practice that's going to be inculcated into the school and they continue to do it. That's a resource they need to have. Then I think we'd first look at, all right, well, it'd be reasonable to include that resource within Title I, or is that something we need to come back and look at above and beyond the personnel ordinarily assigned to the school, which might ultimately come from the general fund?
Okay, I know Dr. McDavid went over a whole list of things that I'm sure that cost a whole lot more than $280,000.
And I think to Mr. McCoy's point, a lot of that support already in there because of their Title I status. And I don't, their Title I budget would probably be $600,000-$700,000.
Yes, sir.
And I don't envision that status is probably not going to change. This, as you know, based on the poverty level of the school.
What is the ESOL percentage there now?
Dr. McCurry, do you know the ESOL percentage at Lakeview?
I can get it.
About what it is. I just need an estimate. I don't need exact. 40, 50%?
I want to say 34, but that may be way off.
In the past, it's been 1/3, but I'll look now. I get it quick.
Jason can look it up real quick in Power School. It is increasing significantly each year too.
I know with the Title I funds that they receive, they apparently are already spending that on items for the school to maintain or to try to maintain what they had gained over the years. And so I'm just wondering if they need more funds. Is that something we need to be looking at in the budget?
So what I would say is that, Dr. McDonald, again, and Dr. McDavid sit in the Title I meetings that we have at all schools. A lot of times it's rearranging some money within the Title I that we look at, because the strategies we have to look at every year. Is it being effective? There are times that we look at certain strategies and say, this is not quite we're not seeing a gain from this strategy we're implementing and spending $80,000, $100,000 on. So a lot of times that will be reallocated sometimes. So again, that's why they sit at those meetings, ask kind of those tough questions and say, you've been doing this for 6 years, but we're not really seeing any gains from this for 6 years. Beyond that, as Dr. McDonald and all the assistant superintendents do, if there is a need past the Title I funding, or at any school past the funding a school has, they would float that up through ultimately Dr. Royster, Dr. Turner, through the senior leadership and academics and all that to say, well, we really feel like we need an above baseline, or we need X or X or X to sustain this growth. And then we would consider that at the senior leadership level as far as whether or not that's something we can take out general fund or, whatever happens to be.
Have they requested extra funds in the past, Jeff, or do you know?
Lakeview has not. Lakeview has always been on multiple lists each year. And so it is not uncommon for us in the spring to get the State Department to send us and say, oh, by the way, you have $180,000 more to spend. So it's not uncommon for us to get throughout that, not just that $600,000 or $650,000 or whatever they have in Title I, it is not uncommon for them to get additional state money because of the list they're on throughout the year. So it has always been, at least for the last 5-6 years I've been here, and I think since Dr. McDonald has been here, they've always had a plethora of money to spend for what we needed.
Okay. Question I've had for all the Title I money that we get, does that go for Greenville County Schools, just Greenville County School District schools, or does it go also out to the other schools in the private schools?
There's some that goes out to private entities. Some used to go out to charter schools when we had charter schools. Legacy used to be one that we maintained with Title I funds when they were part of ours. Once they moved out of our district to the state charter school district, they get their own funds through state charter. There is a small handful of private schools and, I forget the other term.
The neglected and delinquent sites.
Yes, neglected and delinquent sites that we give, but it's a very small percentage of money because they're very small sites. Like St. Anthony's used to be one. I don't think they're on the list anymore, but they are. Okay, so a little bit of funds might go to someone like St. Anthony's because they do serve Title I. Very small percentage.
So that all the Title I funds doesn't stay within the school district?
Not 100%, but it's pretty close to 100. It's a very small amount that goes out.
I had heard that recently, and that's why I was asking.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess that's all the questions. I was trying to think of another one. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Meek, I'll give you like a couple of minutes, because if no one else has questions, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. So all this conversation about resources, when you look at the gains that you're getting, and granted, I still, 3 years really isn't enough time to really know what the impact is of what we're doing, I don't think. But middle school and Woodmont High, they don't seem to be seeing the same sort of significant gains from focusing on the instructional piece as the elementary schools. And so, my question was going to be, what are the strategies we're employing across the schools? Well, I heard Dr. McDavid share a ton of strategies that are being shared, which, wow, it's amazing the way you just rattled that off. So kudos to you for knowing so well what it is we're spending, but if we're employing a lot of different strategies in addition to what we're doing here, how do we ever really parse out what's making the difference? So if we're not, I can imagine if you have a school that's not on that list and you take one of those additional resources and you put it in one of the other schools that's not getting the focus school, then maybe you could draw a comparison about, okay, if we put this resource in a school that's not getting all this intensive instructional support, how does that work? But without doing that, you just said we have a plethora of funds available that we've been spending. How do we know if we are using those funds effectively? And should we be focusing on, I know some of the schools that have seen tremendous gains, they have had a focus on things outside of instruction, right? So how are we justifying, how are we validating that what we're spending on different strategies is really giving us what we need?
So one of the things that's required in Title I, Title III, all those funding sources that we get is that those strategies, number one, have to be research-based, and number two, that we have to evaluate that every single year. And so for the ESOL position, for example, one of the things we would look at the end of that, 1 year is not always enough sometimes of, implementing something to look at whether it's had growth. ESOL, though, that would be one of the things we could look at the end of 2 years or a year or 3 years to say, our ESOL score subgroup population has improved significantly. And can you tie it always directly back to the fact you had an ESOL teacher? Not necessarily, because we may have been working with the staff on ESOL strategies as well in the regular classrooms.
You're doing the two things.
Right. What I will say, and Dr. McDavid and Ms. Lewis and Dr. McDonald, Dr. Mitchell-Hofer, I can tell you when we walk into a focus school for the first time, within, of observing a bunch of classrooms, we can tell you pretty much immediately where the issue is. Almost all of the focus schools you see, and the principals would echo this, almost every single one of those focus schools you see, the number one issue was core instruction. And so it was not about they needed more ESOL, they needed more SPED, they needed more. Every single one of those schools, particularly in reading, every single one of those was core instruction. The teachers didn't understand the model. They weren't trained as effectively as they should have been. They weren't implementing it with fidelity. The principal didn't know how to monitor it for fidelity purposes. So when we go in, we do all of that. We train. Deborah Johnson's a great example of that. She commented the first 2 years of being there, she's like, working with Stacy Shamus, another one of our coaches, is like, I now know when I walk into a classroom exactly what should be happening in guided reading. I know what exactly should be happening in independent reading, because part of that process was training her as administration to know exactly what to look for. Sorry, go ahead.
So I guess Dr. McDavid was going to say something.
I'm sorry,
I want to hear what you have to say. I'm going to lose my own time here if I'm not real careful.
No.
So is there anything,
I was just going to say that within each project, we may have multiple strategies around literacy. So there's not one strategy that targets just literacy. And when you look at those compounding, what we've seen in the past is that the data has been primarily static. That number, that performance has not grown significantly over a series of years. When we put multiple strategies in place and we see it bump, we can't point to that one strategy because there are a lot of things going on, including the professional development, all of that. So there's not really a way, as you mentioned, to parse it out. However, we do use research-based strategies, and we do have to report on their strategic plan and submit it every year, annually to be reviewed on the progress made for each dollar that was spent.
Okay. So I might have a couple of follow-up questions that I might ask Bart in a later Cal, just about some of those strategies and And the funding piece in particular and how that's gone about, so.
I think one of the important things, I didn't hear it in that answer, but I think it was probably implied. I'll try to say it real quickly. If you think back to the previous presentation, and they put a significant amount of information in there based on Hattie's work, we know what works because you can look at the effect size on the things that Hattie's identified, and that's just one researcher. There are others out there. If you're putting your resources towards implementing or further developing those things with large effect size, it's gonna move students as much as you can possibly move them when it's done with fidelity. One thing they didn't note on the math scores, there is an unexplained trend this year at the state level of a decline in math scores that no one yet seems to understand. Now, that's not a reason we don't want ours to go up, but that helps explain part of the math drop this year.
And is that across all grade levels or just elementary and
High school.
secondary? Or
It's across
Just
high
high
school.
Just the Algebra 1 EOC.
That big 25% down there at Woodmont High, it's Algebra 1 ESC. And that's, I don't think, unlike, I mean, the number might be a little bit different, but it is in keeping with the statewide trend that no one seems to have a good explanation for. Although everybody knows the test is different every year.
Okay.
Every year.
So I anticipate this will happen. I'm going to, if without objection, to allow Mr. Meek and Dr. O'Connor to follow up, I'm going to extend for just like 5 minutes. And now Mr. Southern's raising his hand, so. He did, okay, so you're good. All right, so Mr. Sudduth has not spoken. So Mr. Sudduth, I will extend for 5 minutes. Would that suit you? Will that suit you? That works for you? Okay, and Dr. O'Connor, you can follow on behind Mr. Sudduth since he hasn't yet. All right, for 5 minutes, thank you. You're up, Mr. Sudduth.
Yeah, tell me where I can find an explanation for CSI, ATSI, and TSI.
I'm going to send you, Mr. Meek, sorry, I'm going to send you this sheet that you can't see on the slide. We'll send this to you. That actually describes all the state designations. It was just, again, because we're working with the State Department on some errors that they sent us, we're updating this currently. But we'll send this to you, and it has all the designations on it.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, awesome. Dr. O'Connor.
Yes, since the Woodmont High drop is specifically related to Algebra 1, wouldn't that be more of a middle school problem?
I would not necessarily say it's a middle school problem. I think we have been working heavily when we went into Woodmont. What we talked about before as far as that cycle goes of how they should be running it, I would say there's still, we moved, I think, the needle a lot this year. There's still a lot of traditional teaching happening at the high school level, particularly in math. And so we're changing that. We're trying to move that needle a little bit. When the math standards changed, they changed drastically as far as what they expect kids to be able to do. And so we're still working with teachers to train them on, this is the new way you're going to have to teach math if you want to get these gains.
Probably everybody's needing a little extra help with
Yes.
making sure their Algebra 1
Yes. Statewide, I would say.
probably is harder to do when students are not performing well in their 8th grade.
Certainly foundationally, yes. I would say if you'll look back at the scores, that will certainly impact high school too. I think when you go back and look though too, this was one of our best years in middle school math and ELA. So our math scores in elementary have been phenomenal really for 2 or 3 years. And so that's now filtering up. And so we're seeing, they should start seeing those gains, but we also, working with the high school teachers, they've got to also change just strategies in how we teach kids math is very differently, because the new test is not always just asking SC Ready doesn't, or EOC, I'm sorry, EOC doesn't ask them just to solve a problem anymore. It may solve the problem for them and tell them why it's right or wrong. And so that requires a whole different level of thinking than we're used to doing.
I'm not asking you to answer this right now, but I'm asking you to think about, and Dr. Nordstrom are involved, is there any way that we imagine teacher incentives for our best teachers who are performing at highest levels, and could we use this model for master teachers to go to what we perceive as our struggling schools are the ones that you all are identifying as focus related. Any kind of incentive program that we can imagine offering to have some sort of rotation at least, where those teachers could help their peers if they knew that they were really struggling with math, for example, and pulled somebody strong and gave them an incentive to go someplace even for a year or two. But I just wanted to throw that out because I think we're always trying to imagine that recruiting teachers to the most challenging schools is very hard to do. They burn out, it's hard, Carolina High right now, what would you say the number of brand new teachers that would be, what percentage is high? Well, if we could help by saying, we're going to get some of our veteran teachers to go to the toughest places by paying them a little more or doing something to integrate that mix so that you're not having all of your beginner teachers in the toughest spots and burning out more quickly and then not being able to achieve what you want to. So I just wanted to throw that out as food for thought.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so my follow-up question I might also have is about the vertical articulation because of your point about their teaching standards. Kids are learning in a different way, so their foundation that they're bringing into high school or into middle school is very different in terms of math skills. And so just maybe a follow-up, if you guys could let me know kind of what you do with math vertical.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for math in
Yeah.
particular, that vertical articulation across grade levels.
Yeah, we've
So,
done a good bit with that.
yeah, I'd kind of love to hear about it, but I know we're out of time. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. LaVentus Wells. That concludes our instructional portion of the meeting.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Lisa, Ms. Wells, for conducting this session. I will tell you that we have run way over, and so people need a break. So we're going to take a 20-minute break. If y'all can be back in the lunch, it's a box lunch, and if we can be back here at 12:30, then we can continue, okay? 12:30, and we will proceed with the other sections. Thank you so much. Okay, we will go ahead and continue. Thank you all for coming back. We will continue with administration. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Item 3.01 is the capital budget adjustment for long-range facilities plan capital improvement program. Dr. Royster.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Let me first make sure that you've refreshed your computer, though I think with these new ones it may have done that without you doing it. Ms. Stack noticed an omission in the capital budget information, which we corrected during the last segment. We had left a line out which affected the total. It didn't affect the projects, the scope of work or anything, but it affected the total that we are seeking approval. So you have in front of you, I'm trying to get mine pulled up now, a request that we mentioned to you last month. We talked about advancing the construction schedule for all the weight rooms so that we might have them completed with the last one, I believe now, the completion date of 2023. To ensure that we could accelerate the replacement of Promethean boards, and while we continue to use the term Promethean board, what we're really talking about is it looks more like a giant television than a projector screen, Promethean being really a brand name. And also to address some additional costs that we've identified with the Robert E. Cashin Elementary project, many of which are very similar to the reasons we have additional cost on the Summit Drive project. We knew we'd need to update that budget, and we have that today. So you'll have information in there about the high school weight room, acceleration of that construction program. accelerating our refresh for Promethean board replacement, moving it from a 10-year window down to a 6-year window, and covering the additional costs that we have identified for Robert E. Cashin Elementary School. As we discussed briefly last month, in a manner similar to the revenue in excess of expense from the general fund, we have additional revenues within the capital budget primarily because our bond sales generate a greater revenue beyond the projection that we provided. And we try to very conservatively project because we never know when the rate for the sale of bonds may increase, thereby decreasing the amount we have available to spend. And the value of a mill has continued to increase on both the operational and the debt service side. So Ms. Stack is going to share with you a little more specifically the financial aspect to this. And then Mr. Carlin is here to share with you some of the high points of particularly the additional cost on Cashin, because I think the other is simply acceleration of schedule, but then certainly they'll be available, all of us available to answer any question you might have. Ms. Stack?
Dr. Royster. Greenville County's expanding tax base provides the ability to sell additional bonds, as Dr. Royster mentioned. And each year we look at that, selling additional bonds within our current millage. This additional bond capacity is accumulated, can be used for items like those that are presented in front of you today. This agenda item requests additional financial resources for 3 projects contained within the Long Range Facilities Plan Capital Improvement Program. The first one is an increase in the cost of Robert E. Cashin Elementary expansion of $3.8 million. Increase is due to several factors which are outlined in the agenda item details. Mr. Carlin is here to answer any questions you might have. The second funding increase of $10,145,750 is to accelerate the project timeline for 7 high school weight rooms. This increase would reduce the original funding timeline from 10 years to 4 years, and it is spread over the time of FY20 to FY23. This funding is in addition to the funding provided from the general fund balance one-time expenditures approved in December, which funded 6 high school weight rooms. The third request is a funding increase of $8 million to accelerate the project timeline for Promethean board system replacement. Would reduce the original funding timeline from 10 years to 6 years and is spread over the fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 25. The administration recommends approval of this motion.
Just to give you an idea of some of the funding increase that we've asked for Robert E. Cashin Elementary School. Came back to you in March and asked for an increase. We were still very much in the conceptual design phase. We're in the schematic design phase at this point. And taking into account our curriculum requirements, our adjustments based on pupil-teacher ratio. We've also met with our regulatory agencies, including Office of School Facilities, who's associated with the State Department, Department of Education, as well as some of our local entities, including SCDOT. There are some slight constraints at Robert E. Cashin that are going to require us to, instead of adding a single addition, we're going to have 2 smaller additions on the building. Some of the curriculum requirements are also going to require us to do some extensive interior renovations to get grade cluster groupings situated appropriately. We're having to provide some additional on-site stacking for car rider pickup to keep it off that main road that is becoming more and more congested. We're also separating the bus riders from the car riders in accordance with SED, DOT, and Office of School Facilities requirements. So that's the majority of the reason for this particular increase. We're still in the schematic design phase, so we're still dealing with some unknowns, but we think we've got the right amount at this point to move forward. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have associated with that.
Dr. Rushby? Dr. Rushby, anything else? We're good.